Do you have email communication with them?
Oh, it's gone live again.
Yeah. Soldering with Helen.
Yeah. Can you post a link? Oh, so frustrating.
I think.
Really?
You're live.
Yeah, I know I'm live, but nobody knows.
Say something.
Can you hear me? What? Okay. So, oh, it's again. It's stopped again. It's stopped again. Okay. Right. So, hopefully.
There's audio.
There is? Okay, good. Well, at least. So anyway, finished tinning my soldering iron. That was a frustrating 10 minutes there. Apologies to everybody who just dropped off of my stream. They just started downloading a lot of things. Okay, so as you can see, I've got a nice, let's see if I can get it to focus, ish. But you can see, again, there's a nice shiny silver tip here, which is what we want in order to get a nice electrical connection. So what we're going to do is I am going, this is very wonky solder. So for another second, and then go out. All right, excuse me, I'm not used to unleaded solder at this point, so we've got a nice clean solder joint here. I'm just going to take it off the stand just to have it to show you. What we've got here is you shouldn't have too much solder, but it should have like a little main solder that's not blobby. So it's like slightly curved. I don't know if you can see that. Let's move this a little bit. So yeah, you should have not a blobby bit of solder, and it should be nice and smooth because we don't want it to be either too much or too little. There's a really wonderful visual guide to this, like a little zine by Mitch Altman called "Soldering is Easy," which I would very much recommend you take a look at. It's got great illustrations of all the do's and do nots of soldering. But essentially, the most important thing is in between each solder joint, I give it a little bit of a clean, make sure it's nice and shiny still. Now I'm holding 1, 2, 3. Make sure it's nice and warm before I apply the solder. Onto the joint, not the joint should be nice and warm. It shouldn't be like that you're just blobbing the solder on there, okay? You always put a little bit more than you think, and hold it there for a second after you're done. Okay, you see all the smoke coming off. This is the flux melting off, okay? So here we have like a nicely soldered LED. So what we're doing here is I'm going to show you how to clip it off. We have an LED that's soldered nicely on. It's firmly connected, electrically connected. There's not too much solder. There's not too little solder. Again, have a little look at the Soldering is Easy zine or the Adafruit Learn Guide to Soldering to see an actual nicely zoomed in pictorial representation of what it should look like. And then what we're going to do is, because we don't want these leads here, we don't want these legs, these have served their purpose. What we're going to do is use our snippers to snip them off. Now remember when I said earlier that once you snip it off, if I just were to snip it off like this, maybe into somebody's eyes. So what you should always do is hold the end that you're snipping off while you snip it. So not going to go everybody and get into someone's eyes, okay? Snip. That's snipped flush down to the end. So we're not going to get a dirty a messy PCB, okay? So again, here we're going to tidy up this other leg. I am going to support the PCB in one hand and hold the leg, the LED in the other. Snip it again. And we've got an LED that's been soldered on fully, and then the legs off. I'll do that a few more times just so you can have a look. Again, so here we go. Again, we've got another, turn it back over so we can actually see which way around we're doing these things. We've got a whole bunch more LEDs. Again, long leg positive, short leg negative. I'm actually going to slot in a bunch of them this time so that we can work on a few of them at the same time. So there's an LED in one of them. Let's pop a few of them in. I'm just going to sit here and solder them together so you can just watch me. There's actually a little where you can watch people soldering. This is a very easy soldering kit. Oh, I shouldn't say easy because, of course, it's challenging. Anything like this is challenging the first few times that you do it. But when you get a little bit more experienced, you might want to try something like this. This is a more complicated soldering kit. So I hand soldered all of these. These are different chips, and these are something called SMDs, so surface mount components, as opposed to these, which are through-hole components, because you put the legs through the hole. And these use different techniques, which I'll show you in a minute. I'm just going to solder LEDs in so that you can just watch me soldering a few LEDs to get the hang of it. Let's turn it over. Remember, I just I put the legs out a little tiny bit to give us a bit more space. So hopefully we can actually focus on this. Okay. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to pop a little bit of flux on this. Not because I necessarily need to, but just to demonstrate it. So I just shook up my flux, pushed it down to make the flux flow, and all I'm doing is I'm just painting a little bit of that flux on there. It's a clear liquid, this stuff, so you're not necessarily going to notice it. I'm just going to focus on this again. Okay, so again, I am levering my arms in to get a much nicer angle. I'm warming up the pad and the opponent leg before I add the solder, because we don't want to get what we'd call a cold solder, lob the solder on there. And then I always leave the soldering iron on the component just for an extra second afterwards, to let the solder flow through nicely. And that's something that Mitch Altman told me, actually, and he's like the Gandalf of electronics, so he should know. I am not the world's biggest fan of unleaded solder, but it is much safer for you. And notice, so when is it unsafe to touch with bare hands? It's static discharge. So static discharge isn't something you should worry about with more delicate components. So for example, here we have, this is a little microcontroller. It's inside this silvery package, which is static discharge proof. You shouldn't go around just like rubbing your fingers on chips and so on. But you don't have to be wearing like anti-static shoes if you're just soldering some LEDs onto a PCB. You don't have to worry about that too much. If you're dealing with something a bit more sensitive, like a sensitive component or a chip or something, you might want to but you're still going to be fine. I mean, I've hand soldered chips plenty. It's just you don't want to be doing too much handling of sensitive components. Yeah, do you notice that I am cleaning the tip of my soldering iron, usually every time, sometimes every other time. So that's the thing that's gonna keep my soldering iron happy, is nice and clean. And I'm not heating with my soldering iron, I am heating up the pad and the component legs, okay? Because we don't want hot solder going on cold pads, because that way lies sadness. Okay, let's review it away a little bit. There's definitely a kind of meditative quality to doing a good soldering kit. It's quite fun. I enjoy it anyway. It's kind of a bit like sewing and knitting, repetitive and enjoyable. All right, so that is, I've got 5 soldered on here. It's all very exciting. Hooray, hooray. Now what I'm going to do again is I'm going to show you that I'm going to clip off some of these legs, but then what I'm going to do is, on purpose, I made this LED a little bit skew-if, so I'm going to desolder it, okay? And we can have a look at how to desolder that in a minute. So which one is that one? It's the penultimate one. So I'm just going to clip off all the rest of them. Remember, I'm going to hold the legs so that it doesn't ping off into my eyes. We don't want that. We don't want to blind ourselves, do we? Sound soldering would be much more difficult. Okay. So I have snipped off all the legs, apart from this one, which is a little bit skew-if, but that's okay. I'm going to show you how to desolder it. So that's a useful skill as well, unless you never make mistakes. Now, where's my lovely desoldering solder sucker? Here it is. Okay, so the way that a desoldering sucker works is, I'm not going to heat it up right now, but essentially what you do is, actually I'll just easier for me. Essentially what you do is, when the solder is molten, so when it's hot, what you're going to do is you're going to attach your solder sucker, the silicone bit, to where the solder is, and then you're going to press this button, and it springs back outwards, and it eats the lovely soldering iron right back. It eats that solder, it sucks it away. So first of all, I am going to pop this here, using my left hand here, and even that. And then what I'm going to do is, when I see it start to flow again, you can actually feel it a bit as well. You can suck it away. Look at that. It takes a little bit of practice. You can't really see because it's not high res enough. Well, it is high res, it just doesn't focus. But it's been sucked clean away. So basically, I'm going to do that again on this side. I'm going to heat up this the solder around it. Yeah, and then I'm going to suck it away. Now, let's see if that's able to come out. On one side it's free, but on the other side it hasn't. It's left a little bit of solder, enough solder there. It's left enough solder there to stick it to them. So what you do, and it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but sometimes the best way to desolder something is to put more solder on it, because then you get enough solder to suck it away again. So I'm going to bang a bit more solder on that. If it plays with me. Yeah. So there's a bunch more solder on that solder station. And what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to heat it up. And then I'm going to in the end of my solder sucker, which is stopping it from sucking it out properly. So what I'm going to do, do it again. Lovely solder stick, lovely solder sucker. Whoops, nothing wasn't on the correct bit. Is it still going? Good. We have a lovely desoldered component. Okay, so that is how to solder and desolder a part. The desoldering takes a little bit of fiddling around sometimes, but it gets easier as you get a little bit more practice. So that's how to do ordinary through-hole soldering. I'm going to show you very quickly. Taught me that. I kind of guessed it and then looked up on YouTube Studio. So once you start looking at more complicated soldering kits or doing your own thing, you might want to use different parts. So SMD. So this is what a PCB looks like, by the way. And this is these little pads here. They're called little pads. You'll see that some of them will have like a hole, like that's what a through hole is, and some of them will just have pads, right? And sometimes your SMD soldering will come with these pads instead of these are examples of the pads as well. Instead of actual through hole components. And what you need to do then is a little technique. It's not so difficult once you know how to do it, but I'll show you. Instead of soldering the component on, what you want to do is create a little pillow, essentially, a little pillow of something, and then place it on with. So basically, here we are. Instead of putting it in the helping hands, what I'm doing is holding it just down to the table here. But you can use your helping hands if you want. And what you're going to do here is use your soldering iron to melt a little pillow. There we go. See if you can see that. Here we are. Yeah, you can see that's that. I've melted a little pillow of solder onto one end of the soldering station. What you do next is you take your SMD tweezers, and you take your strip of SMD components, and you can peel them off like so. It's a little bit fiddly. They're very small as well. So what you do then is you can see here, look how tiny they are. These little things. Again, this is advanced stuff. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So this is what an SMD component looks like here. You see that? So the autofillers, here we are, there we are. So an SMD component looks like that. And what you do is you place it, this is actually the wrong size, but you can still get what I mean. You place your SMD component the one side on the little pillow of solder, and then once it's placed, you hold it in place with the tweezers, and then you melt one side. And then you'd solder the other side, just like you'd solder normally in a through-hole thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna do much SMD soldering, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like and tell you the theory of what it does, so that if you ever see this on a kit, that you're not going to get confused. You're just like, oh, okay, that's a part that goes on top rather than through the hole. And then all you do is you do a little pillow on the thread one side. So yeah, Last thing I wanted to show you is how to solder a header. So, well, I'll show you that you can do these. So often you'll get this is like a small microcontroller, a little tiny computer, and you'll see that there's a bunch of different headers. So this is what's known as a header, and they leave them not soldered on because sometimes people want to use these with the bare wires. They might want to use them with a breadboard, but here you solder them on yourself. Okay, so these headers are sometimes too long. If they are too long, you use your faithful snippers to snip off one or more of your headers. And then what you do is you put them in place and you solder them one by one. And the easiest way to do this, and I wish somebody had told me this when I was first starting out, is you pop them into into a breadboard, which is a prototyping tool. Now we're not using this breadboard for anything actually real. What you're just using it to do is keep the headers in while we solder it. Okay, so again, hold it down. Remember, you're heating both the pad and the component, in this case the header, and then we're feeding in the solder. So yeah, there we go. Now, that is how to solder a header. I didn't actually solder it on because I actually didn't want this one soldered on. But yeah, basically you just do them one by one. Now these are complicated to desolder. They can take a long time. So my recommendation for this is if I do need to desolder a header off of something, I will often use my little snippers to snip 1, 2, 3, and so on. You snip all the way down the row. And then you can desolder them one at a time. And in fact, one of my friends gave me a tip, it's a killer tip, is if you can't get a header out when you push it through, use a jumper cable to kind of physically push it through while the solder is warm, so that you get a nice clean, and then you can just pull the jumper cable out. So you can use the end of a jumper cable to desolder that. Okay, so that is a basic introduction to soldering. The final thing I wanted to make you aware of, so we went through all my electronic tools. We went through how to solder through hole and SMD and jumpers. We did some desoldering even. And we showed you the SMD things. The final thing I wanted to talk to you about is this is something that these two things, you'll see these on your electronics workbench as well. This is called a breadboard, and this is called a proto board. So a proto board and a breadboard are prototyping tools. And you'll get them in two form factors. This is called a half, and this is called a full. These are the two most common. You can also get them in different colors. So here is a black one. They do vary quite wildly in quality. I would definitely, to save you pain and heartache, recommend that you buy your breadboards from somewhere good. This breadboard I bought because this black breadboard I bought off of eBay because I thought it looked cool, but it's been an absolute pain. It breaks quite frequently, and it's really difficult to get pins in and out of. So I'd always recommend buying something a little bit, it's only a couple of dollars more expensive to buy one from Adafruit, but they're just much better quality. They last a lot longer, and you don't have things breaking all the time. Anyway, so a breadboard is essentially a prototyping board. It means that you don't solder, and it's just meant for, here's something I'm prototyping at the moment. It's meant for like popping in, and it's meant for popping in components before you're sure of your design. Okay, so once you're sure of your design, you might want to use a prototype, a printed circuit board, or you might want to use something like this as a permanent proto board. But before you get to this, you'd solder things onto this, and then it would stay there. So soldering is pretty, not final, but it's when you're sure of your design. But before you get to the prototyping, the PCB stage, you may wish to use a breadboard. Like this. You just put the components in and out. Let me grab myself an LED. So here we have, so you can, little holes that work in two different ways. They've got two columns and then a whole bunch of different rows, okay? Which are divided into two sections. Now, if I turned this over and I pulled off the back of this breadboard, you'd see that each of the rows in this column and this column are electrically connected by just a strip of metal, okay? And this also would be electrically connected with just a strip of metal. It's just a long column, okay? So this has got plus or a negative, but that's just to help it be a little bit more user-friendly. It's just strips of metal, long, thin ones on here, and then like shorter, thin ones going across, so columns and rows. And if you Google image search for the underneath of the breadboard, you'll see what I mean. And what you do is you use those holes to put in your components. So, for example, I want my negative leg of my LED to go here and my positive leg of my LED to go in there. I can then use a jumper cable to connect the so this is the positive leg here. I can connect that to the positive rail over here. This would then get connected to a battery or a resistor or whatever. It's just a way of making a circuit without it being permanent. So obviously, like, I can just pull these out, or if I wanted to add in a button, or if I decide, oh, I need to add in a resistor, I can just like plop it in there. It's really not so difficult. So here we are. That's a resistor that's gone in. I don't know what value that is, but it's, if I connected this up to ground and this up to power, this LED would now light up. I'm assuming, well, I think this resistor is a wrong value, but I'm assuming this resistor is the right value. But if I wanted to add in something else, so for example, like a button, I could do that here. So it essentially allows you to chop and change, experimenting with your resistor, with your different components, while you're finalizing the design of your circuit. Breadboards can be a little bit confusing at first. I would just recommend you have a little look at what they look like when they're stripped away, because there's like lots of numbers and letters. They don't necessarily mean anything unless you want them to, again. So you can have your things go anyway. It's just that there are electrical connections. So as long as you remember that these ones are electrically connected down and these are electrically connected across, but not bridging the gap, then you're going to be golden. Okay, well, I have been going for nearly an hour and a half, and I'm supposed to go only for an hour. I mean, I know there's been technical difficulties in that time, but hopefully I've given you a little bit of an insight into the basic electronic workbench and the basics of how to start yourself soldering and how to start yourself working with some of the tools that you will see on your electronics workbench. So thank you very much for hanging out with me, and hopefully I'll do another one when I'm slightly more when my connection is a bit more stable. But yes, okay. Thanks everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.